Welcome, and thank you for being here. I'm so stoked to have you on the Passion Project. You might not tell by the screen and where we are, but we are on Kauai. We're at the Garden Isle, your home island, and I'm super stoked to be able to film here. So this is the first one on island, so
yeah,
it's cool.
We got a few lights in here.
Yeah,
it's definitely
light us up.
Well lit.
But listen, it's cool for me because you've been high on the list to get in the podcast since the beginning because, and we were just talking offline, like I love sharing stories of good people doing good things. And your backstory is super interesting. And what you're doing today is not just interesting, but super important and super relevant in the world or in this world. And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is your community active or activist or activism role, the passion for the community, the conversation will transcend Hanalei and the North Shore of Kauai in the importance of doing what you guys are doing. So we'll talk a lot about what you're doing today, but there's so much more to it. And I always like to do on the podcast is talk about your path to what brought you here. Now we're sitting 30 miles from your home where I think you've spent most of your life and we'll talk about, but what you're doing today is probably very different than maybe even what you ever saw happening, or maybe you saw this all along. So
no, you're right.
I'm really curious to jump into it, but you also have this incredible background of working with some pretty iconic people in the surf world. And this island, it's incredible how many incredible world-class water people, men and women, big waves, like it's really incredible. So, and you've been immersed in that world as well. So what we're going to do today is it's a bit about the Joel Guy Show, but we're going to talk about your time.
Just leave now if you want.
No way. It's so good. And it really is. It's so good what you've done. And I know there's a lot to the story, which we'll dig into, but again, the big piece we'll really get into is today and what you're doing and how meaningful and important it is for your community because it's such a special place. And there's a bit of a PSA, a public service announcement in this, I think, for tourism, people that come to islands like Kauai and come for vacation or come to think about relocating or start a business or whatever it may be. There's a lot of what you do that touches on all that. And we'll talk about the bright side and maybe even the darker sides and why it's so important to have people like you involved. Is that cool?
That sounds great. Yeah,
Rad.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, listen, you inhabit one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And that's when we talk Kauai, people are like, anybody that's been here or any of the Hawaiian Islands has a vision immediately. That's why I think Hyena was such a big thing for so many people, because so many people have been to the banyan tree on Front Street. And so watching that burn and seeing, like everybody has a visual, but if you've been to Hanalei, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, you have a vision. You can close your eyes if you've been there and you're like, oh my God, it's so rad. I've been to the pier. I've jumped the pier with my family. I've done these things in Hanalei. You grew up right in the zone, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I feel like I did win the jackpot when it comes to, where you're born and raised. It's not a choice generally you get to make because you're just at the mercy of your parents. And so my mom and my dad, decided to have a bunch of kids out in Hyena in the 70s. And so that's a very unique situation, right? There wasn't very many haulis, first of all, out in that area. And then, and then my dad and mom broke up pretty quickly and she decided to hunker down and just make a go at it. And, so yeah, growing up as a child in Hyena in those days was just, I feel super unique, especially looking back on it. And I think that's what shapes a lot of my work now is this, you're gifted with this incredibly fortunate childhood. I could try to give back for 500 years and it would never be enough for the gift of what I received, right? That kind of unique, time for myself and my family and the relationships that built out of that, the experiences I had, I think were something that, once again, you could there's nothing I could do that would be able to give back to this community that was so good to me and my family.
Rad.
Before I get forward, though, I do want to say, and you touched on a little bit, is how much, as someone who lives here and you're here a bunch, how much we appreciate you and the work and I was thinking about it driving down here and like, I'm going to talk about myself for an hour. Like, yes,
we are.
Well, yeah. But I don't think it makes sense without really honoring you because, I don't know how long you've been coming here and people always want to kind of qualify what they're going to say. And I'm sure this isn't unique to Kauai, but it's like, I've been coming here for 20 years. And so this justifies everything I say after that. Right. So I've been here for 10 years. And so, and you've been able to come here. You've built your community, and clearly you had a paddling community. You probably had relationships. Like I said, I don't know all the details, and we can or can't go into that. But the fact of what you've been able to do for us, like your commitment to giving back to ocean sports, like you found your niche and you went after it, and you didn't leave that back home. You came here, you found a business, you got a home, the American dream, and continue to bring that, that philanthropic thread that you carried obviously as a child growing up. Well, I don't know where it was embedded in you. I'm new to the philanthropic world of nonprofits, so I'm learning a bunch. But watching what you've done here, it seems like it shouldn't be unique. Like it seems like it should be common for everybody that comes here to be like, oh, what's my give back? Like, how do I provide something for this amazing place that has given them so much, whoever they are, whether they're here for a week or a month or a year. It's not that common, right? And I imagine there's reasons for that. It's not because they're bad people. Generally, a lot of people have their philanthropic model set up back home somewhere. And they come here with some dough and they go, okay, I'm just going to buy a place. I'm going to do a thing here. But I don't want to I don't ruffle feathers. So I'm going to keep my stuff close to the vest and not really start to get involved in. And you've been just like bold and brave, and then kind of hit it out of the park with the organizations that you've chosen to be a part of, the community that you built around you. Now, paddling is probably a pretty safe community. They're usually pretty good people. They like the ocean. They like each other. They like health. So there are some. It seems like there's some easy kind of guardrails in that world. But man, as someone who's been able to kind of know you and get to know you, just can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And I hope that appreciation for you will then bleed out into others. And you talked a little bit about that in the lobby, about how, are there things people could learn about Kauai that maybe they didn't realize. And I think, what you've done is just a great model for anybody that comes here. And so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate it. And listen, there's a lot of threads in there. I think there's the pragmatic side, and then there's like growing up. This will come into the conversation. Growing up as a surfer in California, the people that you were surrounded by in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and until today, not only were they some of the best, or are some of the best surfers in the world, but it was also, and we'll get into this right now about growing up here, it was also some of the most regulated, not notorious, but those days, like you had to be very aware of your surroundings and how not your surroundings, you have to be very conscientious of how you interact with people. You have to be a good person, or you're going to get your ass handed to you, especially on the North Shore of Kauai. I grew up knowing of the reputation of people like the Kinemakas. They were iconic surf royalty, but you also don't go where that was the reputation growing up as a little Halle kid in Newport Beach surfing, 2-foot beach break. Yeah. We had dreams of coming to surf over here, but you also knew your place and what that would be like. And coming over here as a business owner, Halle business owner, like I was determined. Now we do this at home too, but I was determined to make sure that we were seen as a good part of the community, not just another person coming in to take. And so it's been lovely for me to be able to be a part of it and find great people. We were introduced by a mutual friend, TJ Callahan, who grew up here and lives in Huntington. And I was very fortunate to have spent a lot of time in Hawaii before we had this opportunity on Kauai. I used to go to Maui quite a bit. So I learned, I think, a lot just through osmosis and through the surf reputation of what it takes. If you're going to move to an island, and maybe this is part of the PSA, if you're going to move somewhere, be cool. There's so many Hawaiian words or terms that would fit in here, but you got to be a part of the community. Yeah. I'm sure you could cite many, many, many examples of people that come over here, as I said, with dough. They buy real estate, and so they think they're local, and they can do things, make decisions, and play it like they're in Southern California. Right. There's someone in my neighborhood over here that's doing that right now, and it doesn't go over well, and it's very transparent. Yeah. And people don't forget. They don't forget.
Yeah, I think people sometimes come here, like COVID. We had a lot of people moving into town after COVID. And they're like, oh my gosh, we just discovered this amazing little bay on the North Shore of Kauai. It's got the lowest amounts of COVID in the nation. Like, we need to be there. We're going to live there. This is perfect. We're going to move our whole thing. We can remote work, and we're going to make our whole life here. And then you're like, oh, but there's not a JC crew nearby, or there's not a mall. Like, these amenities that we have back home are not there. And after a month or 6 months or a year, that becomes a little uncomfortable. Like, there's no theater, and education, right? There's maybe not the best education for my kids. So I think people have this perception when they get here and they move here, and then they realize, we have our list of problems too. Like, you left traffic, we got our list too. You just haven't seen it, right? You haven't really stopped or even cared, maybe didn't care enough, but you didn't have the opportunity to find out what that list is, right? Whether it's, water pollution in the water from old cesspools or whatever the contributing factors are. I think people sometimes forget that because it is so beautiful and it is so easy to ride your bike to the coffee shop and you know, like I said, if you're fortunate enough to be able to buy a home in Hanalei, you're like, this is amazing, right? And it is. I just think that sometimes people don't realize, and then they tend to learn that, like, well, not everybody loves us here because of whatever, right? And whether those are valid or not, those are pressures that people feel, and then sometimes have to end up moving back home to wherever they came from because it didn't quite check all the boxes that they thought it did.
You know what's funny, Joel, is that one of my buddies who is older and has traveled a lot in his life and was born in Europe, he goes, Mark, everybody has a list. They have a list of all the problems they have where they live, and they have all the great reasons they're going to move somewhere else. And within 3 years, they have a list of all the problems where they moved. Everywhere. And I've heard a lot here that, like, people last 6 months very often. Mm-hmm. That's about the tipping point. They're like, I need that J. Crew, or I need that whatever. I mean, there's a lot. One of the things I learned early on, and I was told unequivocally by a long-term local who you know very, very well, he goes, Mark, it's the razor's edge here. Mm-hmm. You know, it is first world and third world, depending on the day, the weather, the news, politics. If a container ship doesn't show up, then you may not have propane or eggs, or you may not have milk for an extra week. You know, we know that in our business over here. So it really, and people don't see that. They see this, again, when you're a tourist and you're here for a week, you see how spectacularly beautiful it is for 5 or 7 days, and then you're poof out. Mm-hmm. Or 2 days, you know, you stayed on the South Shore and came up. So again, I think moving anywhere, to your point, is very different than vacationing, right? For sure. And I think all of this is important to hear as a setup because it influences all the things that you've both done and you do, right? Yeah, because so much of what you do with the Hanalei Initiative and beyond is based on the incredible history that you talked about growing up here, and how do you secure that for your kids and generations to come when you have all the impacts of everything we're talking about. A lot of money come to the island, people want to live here, blah, 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 all these things. So you have this, it's a very dynamic thing, but super important, and we'll get into that. But let's get back to the formative stuff. So you grow up here during the 70s. Yep. For everybody's sake that may not have been or may not know well the North Shore, you talked about growing up in Wainiha. In Hyena. So you have Hyena, Wainiha, and Hyena going, Hanalei. So walk people through, because it's really from the bridge from the bottom of Princeville into Hanalei to the Ke'e Beach, the end of the road. How far is that?
8 miles.
8 miles.
Yeah.
How many bridges?
Was there like 9 one-lane bridges?
One-lane bridges, still, which we'll talk about, historic bridges. Yeah. We won't talk about the average cost of real estate down here, but these are small, sleepy towns to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, it ranks as one of the most economically poorest communities in the nation. Like, it goes up against, like, you know, any of these super funky little southern towns. Like, it because, and there's still a high net wealth there, but nobody's making that kind of money there, right? So you have this huge, vast split between the haves and the have-nots in there. But I think we can save that for later. I think more importantly, not more importantly, but I think where you're going was, you know, growing up in Hyena and what that was like. Yeah, so there's Hanalei, there's Waipaw, Wainiha, and Hyena, right? And that's that 8 mile stretch that goes from the bridge in Hanalei to Ke'e Beach, right? And then the Nepali coast starts. And that's one of those scenic, which we'll talk a little bit about later, just one of the most beautiful coastlines on the planet. It's one of those kind of bucket list hikes that is really one of the big attractions to the North Shore. And especially once you're there, everybody wants to do that. And I think that's where we'll end up with the initiative. But yeah, growing up in Hyena was amazing. Like I said, it was kind of a storybook childhood where you know, like I said, you don't have a choice of where you're going to be born. And your mom goes, okay, we're going to hunker down in Hyena. My dad and her separated when I was about 2, and he bounced. And so it just blows my mind that when my mom was 27 years old, she had 4 boys, and she was a single woman on the beach in Hyena. Like, I know when I was 27, like, I couldn't raise a cat, let alone 4 kids at my responsibility with nobody helping and just winging it out there as a haole. And I think she could have went back to the mainland and, you know, kind of folded up shop and said, okay, it didn't work out with her man. I'm gonna go back to her parents in San Diego and kind of, you know, have her kids there. And instead, she just said, no, I'm gonna give it a go here, and I'm gonna try to play music and be an artist, and she was playing music at all the couple resorts at Princeville,
Really?
and just trying to and just kind of let us be raised by the beach out in Hyena, right? So we grew up eating a lot of fish. We fished a lot. We hunted a little bit. Mostly back then, you got to figure there was maybe 30% of the homes that are there now. So all those homes that are there now used to just be like lots that are just jungle that you never saw the lot line. Just was all jungle, right? So there was a lot of papayas and bananas, and we literally lived off of fruit and coconuts every day as kids. And just years would go by, and you'd be out there. And I have a son now who's 9, and he was like, oh, we surf a lot, and he likes to surf pine trees, and I take him every day. It's kind of my life is to be for these kids, right? It's my children now, and he's like, did you surf pine trees a lot when you were? And I'm like, no, we never left Hyena. Like, my mom wasn't going to hitchhike. We didn't have a car. We would like hitchhike our kids in to surf pine trees. Like, wow. You lived where you lived, right? You bloomed where you were planted, and it was on the beach in Hyena, which fortunately was an amazing spot, but there wasn't a lot of transportation. There wasn't a lot of like maneuverability, which was great because it was a gorgeous place, but it was also challenging in the sense that, like, in those, as you're looking for papayas and bananas, you could come across a big patch of weed growing in one of these jungles next to some place, and you're like, wow. And then, which is, you think you hit the jackpot when you're 11, but it's probably not the best thing for an 11-year-old to find, right? It's just like big plants of just a crip growing everywhere, and you're just like, oh my God, you can just cut it down, bring home branches, dry them, and start smoking joints.
And I'm assuming that wasn't wild. Like, that was planted by
the hippie guy that lived in the thing next door, and but everybody had a lot of those little patches growing around their houses, right? Where there was fruit, and it was illegal, and there was green harvest would come in, so it wasn't like it was just this like nature Taylor camp land where everybody's growing weed everywhere, but there was so much more pot growing back then in the 70s. So we had access to so much more weed as such a young kid, where nowadays, I mean, I'm sure there's harder drugs and there's all the challenges that we face with drug addiction for children. But back then, there was very little oversight and an abundance of pot. So, that's not a great mix for a bunch of kids growing up out there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say.
Wow. Well, I would imagine also with 4 kids, single mom working out in that, kind of like you're on the beach, but it's kind of a country-esque environment, right?
For sure.
It's kind of was a bit of a free-for-all, not free-for-all, but like mom was busy. You guys are on your own. And
For sure. It was like the Wild Wild West out there. I mean, and you got to imagine, like, back then there was Hawaiians and then there was hippies, right? And now we weren't quite in the hippie side of the ledger, but more than we were the Hawaiian side. Like, we were howlies out there, right? So we kind of got lumped in that thing, but it wasn't like there was like, nowadays there's like rich hippies, there's environmental hippies, there's broke hippies, and then there's howlies that are there's the .com group, there's the rock and roll from 35 years ago that had bought homes, right? All the rock stars that came out here and bought their places, and now they're kind of old time howlies, and so there's just so much variety now. Where back then it was pretty much like Hawaiians and it was howlies, and the howlies is pretty much hippies, and so we would you'd have fights break out in front of your house on the road, and there'd be like, a dozen local guys just beating up, looked like 100 hippies, and there would just be full scraps out there, and it would take forever for the cops to come if they ever came. It wasn't like nowadays where like you'd have video, everybody have a shot of it, it'd be social media. There was a little protest in Wainiha the other day, and there was very valid reasoning, but there must have been 20 cops, cars, and everything there, and there was no violence. There was some angry, rightfully so, people from the area that were pissed about the topic. And there was it looked like every law enforcement on the island. Back then, you'd see hippie guys picking themselves up 2 hours later, just beat up and like carrying each other off down the road. Like, where are they? There just was none of that kind of oversight. So as much as it was beautiful and special, it was definitely the Wild Wild West that had those kind of incidences that just went unchecked forever.
Well, how was that gnarly? I mean, that's what we heard. How was it free? And now in hindsight, reading all the stuff, or you mentioned Taylor Camp, which we'll talk about, because I'm guessing that was somewhat of an influence, certainly today with K.A. Beach and all that. Yeah. We'll get there. There's books about it, movies about it. It's wild if you've never heard of it. Yeah. But being a haole kid, one of 4, on your own, out in Hyena, with the locals, no enforcement, mom's working. Like, what was it like for you? Were you scrapping, or were you becoming friends with the local kids? Like, how did it work out for you personally, or for the family?
I really wanted to be local. Like, I'd go to school and you'd see local kids and they would have like Tupperware with like rice and sweet sour ribs, and I would just be like, man, I have my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, just like, fuck, I want to be one of them. Like I want to have that good food and eat that and just live that life. And that wasn't the case for us, right? I had like a kind of, I wouldn't say a hippie mom, but definitely single mom. So she would do the best she could to provide us with the food we have. She was amazing, right? But I always wanted to hang with like, and so I would end up making friends, and like that was kind of where I felt more comfortable, and I really enjoyed that life. And it was interesting, like people talk about, oh, did you have to, get your ass kicked? Sure, there was challenges, and there was fights, but there was kids moving in that were 11, right? There was a Holly kid moving 11 every year or 10, and that guy would I would be over there trying to beat him up with the local kid, right? Like you're trying to play like a local guy. Yeah. So every year there's more kids moving here, and those guys are the ones, like if you start here, even if you're a Holly and you can simulate well, it was fine. Like I thought it was great. I loved it, and I loved my crew, and we really enjoyed living out there as kids. I felt bad for kids that would move into town, even if you're 8. Like that's not born and raised there, right?
Different.
10, yeah, like that's a different demographic, and their parents are kind of awkward, and they're trying to get dropped off at school, and you're like, oh, you're gonna get it, So,
wow. Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, again, that's the stuff that we grew up surfing, dreaming about surfing over here, but scared of what it would be like if we actually went.
Yeah.
And there are certain areas that you were like, oh, Waikiki, no big deal. North Shore of Kauai,
yeah.
North Shore, west side of Oahu, like they're just places you like, just by reputation, and that was probably partially it was created. Like we don't want anybody over here. Like so we're going to make it sound super heavy.
And they're the Hawaiian, like they're the most loving people in the world. Like you'll never go hungry at a Hawaiian's house, right? At a Hawaiian family, I ate at Kopamaka's every night. Like I would eat dinner over there at Jake Maka's, and those guys would feed me every single night. And I'm sure they knew I had a single mom. There was no dad that was creating trouble, right? They were like, these Holly kids from across the street can come eat here every single night. And there was chicken fighting going on. Like you learned how to like navigate through chicken fights and scraps and all those things, because they were so loving. They were so open. They were so welcoming to me. I mean, obviously I'm not a threat. I'm a 7-year-old white kid and my brother, right? 2 of us were out there. It wasn't like we were like trying to, come in as like the Irons brothers or some like, young adults who are coming here trying to like find the surf frontier. And I can't imagine the scraps those guys got into with like Bull Harada and those old timers. But at that point we were little kids, right? And they would just be welcoming and loving to us more than anybody. I mean, they were so awesome to us little kids.
And I think that's the dichotomy, because that is the Hawaiian culture. That is 100%. Aloha and ohana. But in the surf world and that goes anywhere, localism, it's a different animal. Like probably like the dope that, like you don't want to stumble onto someone growing dope and taking their plants, and you probably don't want to go to some of the spots that are super local. It's a different animal, but on land, like, yes, like that's the reputation of the islands forever. I think that's part of the draw, right?
And as it is now, like there's a surf culture that has all those reputations, but there's a lot of guys that don't surf. Yeah. There's a lot of Hawaiians that fish or hunt or don't even go in the ocean, right? They're cattle and ranchers, and there's just beautiful, huge families. Like there's probably a bigger population there than there is, but the ones that get the most press, especially if you're a surfer wanting to come surf, are going to be the heavy surfer crowd, right? Sure. Which are heavy, and they're the heaviest in that world, but that's still just a world, right? Yeah. And it's going on now. There's a whole surf scene out there that grew up here, and they're all, we're the local, it's like, yeah, and there's a whole philanthropic world that's doing amazing things for our community. There's a whole, merchant community. There's all kinds of different demographics out there that are hoping to, do good.
Well, I think it's really cool that you shed that light on it, because I think people coming here to vacate or vacation, they just see a little sliver. My hope is that people go out and get reservations and go out to KA Beach or, go see it, but they do it respectfully, which is a lot of what you guys have created a strategy for. I always tell people, when you go to Hawaii, get off property. If you're going to go stay at a hotel, great, but go see real Hawaii. Yeah. It goes for anywhere in the world. Yeah. Get off the resort, go see what the world is made of, and go out and go for those hikes and go for those walks and get out of the towns and get out of the touristy areas and just go explore, because that's what this island is all about.
Yeah, I mean, don't go too far. No, just kidding. I'm just joking.
Stay on the trails. Right.
No. But I mean, you're right. And I mean, just the beaches themselves. I mean, I feel like you can go to KA and people, they come from all over the world and they get to that beach and it's amazing, and the lagoon's right there. But if you walk 100 yards down the beach and look at the view of the Nepali coast, it's like you're on a different whole planet, right? And so I think 90% of the people stay right there. And if you just go a little bit down the beach, you'll blow your mind. I hope that people do those little adventures within public places.
Well, I always say, if you're even in Hanalei, go to the back of the parking lot, wherever you are, and just sit and look up at the mountains. Like you think you're looking at a postcard or a painting, and it's real life. I mean, it's just anywhere you look, it's a 10 out of 10. And that's why there's been such a draw, which is why organizations like Hanalei Initiative and all these others that are doing the good to manage it going forward are so important. But let's go back to you. So growing up in Hyena, as you've discussed, school out here is a different animal. Where were you going to school?
Yeah, that was unique. Hanalei School was and still is amazing. I think it's one of the most beautiful public schools in the planet. When I drive my kids now, it reminds me just like when I was going to school there back in the 70s. And it's just an incredible, and the teachers are amazing. My first son, Cole, when he went to Hanalei School, he had the same kindergarten, first, second grade teacher that I had. And then his third grade teacher was my classmate, Wendy Pike, who was a classmate at Hanalei School and now teaches there. So you have a very community, beautiful public school system. From 7th grade on, you go to Kapa'a, right? And that's where things can get a little dark because you're putting a 7th grader on the bus with seniors, right? And the seniors that were on the bus were the ones that weren't driving cars. So they were probably not our brightest and best. So you'd have this challenging demographic of like a 7. Now, I did okay. I usually had a big bag of weed so I could make friends with all boys and do whatever I could do. Well, whatever. Like if you could do better. But if you're like a young girl who's like 13, like you have no business being with a 16-year-old, 17-year-old guy, and then you're unrestricted for an hour. You have this hour ride into town, an hour ride back every morning. So it was challenging. And then you get all the way to town. Then you're in Kapa'a, which is you're not going to play after school sports. You get out of school at 2:40, get home by 4. So there wasn't a lot of there was no collegiate sports, no kind of after. We played soccer out in Hanalei a lot. Or surfed, right? And that was kind of it.
Were those the two things?
That was it. And mostly you end up going surfing because soccer was a little too organized, a little too late. And a lot of the better soccer players also wanted to surf, so they'd go surfing. So, I mean, it was a little trickier. But, yeah, having to go to Kapa'a from 7th grade on, I think was super problematic for all the kids
I can
out
only
there.
imagine. Not only that, it's an hour on the bus. I mean, it's a long haul both ways. Yeah. If you know this area, it's a haul.
Yeah, and you're leaving in the dark, right? You're leaving. My mom played music at night, so you would have no parental morning supervision. You get up, have your bowl of cereal, and then just get out the door at 6:30, and you got to wait for the bus. The bus comes at 6:40. It doesn't get to school till 10 to 7:40, 10 to 8. So you're over an hour on this bus. You transfer to Hanalei, so you take the morning bus from Hyena to Hanalei, then you get off, and everybody sit there and burn J's and wait for the high school bus to come in. It'd pick you up and take you all the way to school, and then you come home at 4.
Sounds like weed was a big part of growing up.
It really was. It was, and it's so unfortunate. I feel like I'm very grateful for the life I live now, and I feel fortunate for all the blessings and the unique job I have. And I also know that without smoking that many joints when you're that young, like I always wonder like how much better I would have been in school or my early life. That was just it just held me back so much, I think.
Interesting.
And it was so normal. It was such an easy, accessible thing back then. There wasn't too much of a problem letting an adult smoke a joint with a kid, which to me just seems insane.
Right. It's interesting because going to college in San Diego, we had a bunch of Hawaiians, and whether Hawaiian or Haole Hawaiian, but that grew up here. Smoking to them was like breathing for us. Like the people I'm thinking of, they smoked so often, but they were completely functional, normal, smart, able to work, but it was just a daily practice. Yeah. It was part of what they did. Yeah. And I was like, if I smoked like that, I would be curled up in the corner, not able to function whatsoever. Right. Yeah. But it was just part of their life.
It was. And I have an addictive personality. This isn't blame this all on my environment. Like I probably would have smoked joints if I grew up anywhere, if there was joints around. Like I definitely am an addict. So it's not like, and I've been sober for longer than I was using. I think 29 years I've been sober. So not like I'm struggling with some addiction right now, but I definitely clearly will eat way too much ice cream if we put it on the table right now. So those addictive personalities.
Let's go. Come on tonight. We're eating ice cream.
So in Hyena, growing up out there, because there was that abundance, like I said, it wasn't all the environment. It was also the person. But I guess I just say that because not everybody was just a bunch of stoners out there. There was our handful for sure. I just thought it was interesting to see some of the adults being so open. That just blows my mind.
We still see that all the time. It's almost like the parents, we're totally on a tangent, but like I see parents all the time, they're trying to be really cool friends to their kids and they're partying with them, supplying biggest parties at their house. Like I went up to college. I've got 2 kids in college and I went up to like dad's night. Mm-hmm. Some of the dads were out of their minds. And I was like, you're 50, I'm like 55 and they're still doing crazy shit with their kids. And I was like, it's got to stop at some point, right? I don't know. Well, we digress.
We don't get too off of this, but if your kid's in college and you're you're a dipshit and you want to go party with college kids because you didn't do enough partying, whatever. But when your kid's 9 or 6 and they're smoking joints, like that's child abuse, right? That's a different animal, and that's I think what was so problematic with some of the situations out there. But anyway,
all right. Well, listen, there was
good papayas and good bananas and good
coconuts and weed. And organics and a lot of fish, I would imagine. So how big was surfing for you at that time?
It was big. We didn't have sandbars, so it was like chungs and pukas, and then tunnels and cannons were kind of a little more of, you had to really want that. So that didn't come till I was like 12 or 13. And even then, there was a lot of days where it was too much for me to surf at that point. So we were in the water every single day. Boogie boarding, surfing,
that's what life was.
Fishing, lay net. My mom would get us a big lay net, and we would string out a big lay net and with our surfboards, and then surround fish, and then come in and just clean all the fish and eat them. So we lived off of that ocean out there in front of our house, whether it was recreational or subsistence. That was a big part of our day-to-day life. Then in high school, when you can get a car, then I surfed every day. That's when surfing really took off in like 15, 16, 17.
Got it. Well, let's talk about that. So high school, did you like school?
No, I wasn't very good at it. I smoked. I don't want to make this all about smoking joints, but it was tough to really focus on school. I was much better, I think, socially out of school.
Got it. So when you were in school, like towards the end of high school, did you have a vision of where you're going? Did you know any idea what you wanted to do or how you were going to get there?
Nope. I had gotten a job at the Dolphin, and there was some older guys that were waiters that were kind of people we looked up to, like Tommy Chamberlain and these guys that were old surf legends and so I was like, God, if I ever did that, I'd be done. I think I would have reached the pinnacle in my life if I could ever be a waiter at the Dolphins. I was dishwashing at 17, and then partying got too hard and I had to leave. When I was 18, I finally got out of town. I moved to Oahu at that time, to Kailua, to kind of get to try to do the geographic change to kind of get away from the addictive personality. I thought that would be the solution, which wasn't. Was it?
No,
Kailua was raging, super fun town.
I was just there.
So, I got to go to that town and just tore it up there, and hung out with some of the most amazing people there. But I didn't have any really aspirations. College wasn't really something that was talked about. Definitely not in my circle or in my family. So I just went over there. I did take some community college when I first got there, but.
So were you still working restaurants and stuff over there too?
Yeah, I went there and worked at restaurants and came home. I'll just kind of get into the sobriety thing really quickly, because I think I'd love to talk about being sober, because I think it's more of my life is based on the benefits of being sober than the destruction that drugs and alcohol caused. But came back home after the hurricane from Oahu, Hurricane Iniki in 91.
That really devastated this island.
Yeah, blew it apart. And so I had come back to help my family. I left college, and I was going to come back here to try to just help rebuild the island, be a part of this community. And I was 21, 22, pretty young. And then started, and met my first son's mom, and she was a tourist that was out here visiting a bunch, and then she moved out here. We ended up having our boy Cole, but before that, when she was dating, she was kind of living here off and on, and she said, your partying's too much. I'm gonna go home. I gotta go back to Kansas City. I need to leave Kauai. I love it here, but you're just out of control. I was like, okay, well, bye. Like, I'm ready for you to go anyway. And she got home and then called me a month later on February 6, 1996, and said, hey, I gotta tell you something. I was like, what? She goes, I'm pregnant. And I haven't had a drink since that phone call. Like, that was the moment. And pre that phone call, I could not go a day without drinking since I was 16. And I was like 26 or something. So for 10 years.
And you just cold turkeyed it, basically.
Yeah, I had dabbled in sobriety once before, where I just smoked joints. I didn't drink, and I did like 9 months where I didn't drink. I just smoked.
I think we call that California sober.
Is that Hawaiian sober or California sober? Yeah, everyone wants to claim that. So I did that once, like when I was 24. And I remember being like, wow, the no alcohol was really beneficial. But my brain was still pretty crazy with the weed. I couldn't stabilize. And so then when I was partying out of control, I was like, God, at some point I'm gonna get sober. And my dad had gotten sober. So I did have a little bit of experience of what sobriety was like as an adult. My dad, you know, we got closer. I think I was 15 when he got sober, and that's when we got close. He kind of turned me on to what it was like, and he explained his addiction, and probably some of his not being there when we were little kids was based on that addiction. So I kind of understood that. I shared the addictive personality. So then when she called, I kind of knew I was waiting for that, like something to just get me sober, and so grateful it did. I mean, it's been like night and day, like since 26 till now. I mean, there's just everything has been, and my son's never had to have me be loaded. You know, he's been able to benefit from, I mean, I'm sure I struggle and as being a father in so many ways, as you know how hard it is, but getting loaded has never been one of those challenges.
Rad. Good for you. That's a rad story. I mean, it's pretty amazing that you were able to go that hard in just one day.
Crazy, right? It's especially for how hard I like to party.
Isn't it amazing? Because had you not gotten that phone call, not only would you not have Cole, but God knows where you would be today, you know?
If I didn't get sober, I clearly would not be sitting here. There's a million things I would not have done if I had not gotten sober. I'm not sure, like the phone call was the one, but it could have been, you know, some people need incarceration, some need rehabilitation, some people need to bring a life into the world. Like what that trigger was, I feel like I was looking for that trigger, right? And that was just a beautiful one. I was like, oh, killer, I'm going to be a dad and let's do this.
Good for you. That's such a good story. And we'll talk more about your family later on in a bit. But I'm going to keep flowing here. So you come back, you get sober. Mm-hmm. What happens?
I was working at the Dolphin restaurant again, back to Dolphin, but I was managing it. And I felt like, oh my gosh, I've really reached the pinnacle. And then we had an opportunity to take over an old restaurant in Hanalei. So my family and I, we put a couple bucks together and we took over this beautiful little spot and called it Bamboo. And that was in 2000. So from the end of 1999, we opened in 2000, and we had a 15-year lease on Bamboo restaurant. And
where was it?
We sold the lease to Barracuda.
Oh, you're kidding!
Yeah,
oh my gosh,
so that
one
was
of the most beautiful
restaurants. Yeah, beautiful building,
the
beautiful
most
place.
epic view.
Yep. So I had that place from 2000 to 2005, where I ran and operated my own bar and operated sober, and kind of like that was our scene. Like that was my whole life, was running that restaurant downtown Hanalei, and also was the time when our surf demographic was just blowing up, right? With Andy and Bruce were going off, and Barca and Roy and all these guys were just becoming rock stars in the surf world. Was the same time I had that, and so I had this great place for them to come and party after they'd win a contest, and Andy would come home, and we'd have just a big rager at the restaurant.
So we're talking Andy Irons, Bruce Irons, Dustin Barca.
And so that's when that relationship grew, because those guys are 10 years younger than me, right? So I didn't grow up with those guys. Well, you know, we all grew up in Hanalei. We all want to claim, like, oh, I grew up with Andy. It's like, yeah, but I'm 10 years older than him. Like, we weren't hanging out in the same class or same group. But now we're both adults, right? I'm 30 and he's 21, coming up as a rock star, and I was sober and wanting to learn how to make videos and films. And
where did that desire come from?
Just I think I've been fortunate enough to be able to paint pictures. I have an artistic talent that kind of runs through me that wasn't chosen. I wasn't, you know, it's like nature nurture, like that was a nature thing. And so creating art and editing video just seemed like a natural progression. My mom bought me a video camera and an iMac, and at that point iMac had just allowed you to cut videos pretty easily, so I was able to kind of figure that out. And then that, you know, everybody was becoming filmmakers at that point, because Apple had made it so much easier to achieve. You weren't like cutting, you know, Super 8 and stringing it together.
The technology was there to allow
it. Just right in that era, I was able to figure out. And then you had this subject matter that was just becoming a world known name, right? Andy was just becoming this amazing hero in everybody's eyes across the world. He was winning every contest, started winning world championships, and I was like, man, I can either continue to be working in this restaurant world. But Barracuda was interested in taking over the lease, and they were going to buy that lease, right? So I was like, wow, what an opportunity. And Andy's like, hey, let's go make these films. My sponsors will take care of a salary for you so you can become a full-time filmer, and we'll go travel the world, and we'll just go to all these surf spots that I've been going to, and you can come along and try to document as much as you can. Like, that was kind of a no-brainer. I was like, cool, I'm out of bussing tables and, you know, mopping up the kitchen at the end of the night after someone got in a fight. Like, the restaurant world is just crazy. And so at that point I was about 35 and kind of took a leap of faith to like leave that restaurant world behind and go join those guys and try to make films with just the rock stars of the surf world at the time. And it was amazing.
I mean, just for anybody that doesn't surf, Andy Irons, 3-time world champion, rest his soul. We miss him. He passed away, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years ago. Maybe even closer to, I don't even know. There's a big contest down here every year. And
it's Saturday.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. But I mean, you were filming him at the peak of his powers, which was, there's nobody that's ever challenged Kelly Slater. Most people would know that name.
Or crushed Kelly Slater, let's
right, for those years. Unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
And so you were his personal filmer for how long?
Years. And it was Bruce and him and you know, Barca. Like, I worked with all those guys, but yeah, Bruce and Andy were the ones that were paying the bills on that for me to be able to go travel. And we would have these, you'd set up a trip where it'd be like, okay, we're going to kind of loosely map out the year that in the summertime, Tahiti's going off. So let's make sure we're able to go to Tahiti then. And South Africa, right? Those southern hemisphere spots are going off. And then you go to Indonesia and that time of year, and go to Australia in the fall when it's their winter's coming in. So it was and it was amazing. You go there for 3 weeks and just hunker down and shoot, you know, perfect snapper for weeks on end.
Super fun.
Yeah. And then come home and hang out for 3 weeks. And that's where I started to get more into community stuff, because you'd be home for 3 weeks of no real work, right? You'd send all the footage off to San Diego. There'd be their editors there. I wasn't editing as much. At that point, I was just shooting. They'd provide you with a beautiful camera. You were embedded with the team. You would go off to South Africa and spend a month down there enjoying these cultures and seeing the way these people are living down there and the challenges they have. And you see similarities with the challenges you had back home, right? It wasn't like, oh, Hanalei is this victim to, you know, an influx of visitors, or because there's a lot of places that share that, right? And so how do we solve those challenges? And it was an opportunity to come home and be financially set up, because I was getting the salary, but also work towards goals within our community and seeing some of the impacts, and really just kind of be a fly in the wall and kind of listen to some of the old timers in our community as they were struggling with whether it was the boating issue in Hanalei or vacation rentals or some of these other impacts that were having an impact on our community. And then I would go, okay, it's time to go. I'm going to go to Tahiti for a month. And then you'd go to Tahiti and you would just see a place where local people still own their property on the beach. There are people that are paddling from their front yard on one man's every day. Right? That doesn't happen on the North Shore of Kauai anymore. Like, all those beachfront homes are gone. And so you'd be like, wow, how do they do that? Right? How do you have a place where, and then you go to buy a pair of socks and it's like $14. So there's this huge cost. A gallon of gas was like $9. And this was 20 years ago. Right? So everything was so expensive, but property was still, it was still owned by local people. I think you had to be local to buy land there, right? You had to have either married into it. You couldn't just come and speculate and buy land along.
In hindsight, pretty smart.
Amazing, right? Because like I said, local. And then so what happens is, because everything's so expensive, there's gardens everywhere. We're eating poisson cru. There's so much fresh fish eaten. There's so much of that, like, living off the land there that happened just because of the environment. Because
kind of like when you were growing up here.
Kind of growing up here, exactly. But the prices of everything there, and I don't know if it's, you know, what the government
French Polynesia, right?
French
That's
Polynesia,
what it's known for. It's wildly expensive.
Wildly expensive. But you can't go by there and buy land there. So being able to see that for those years with those guys was amazing. And then there was that rock star point that you were talking about, Andy being world, you know, he was so, we'd go to places in Australia and there'd be billboards of him. And you'd walk into the sushi bar and everybody would just be like, whoa, there's Andy. And all the kids would be like wanting, you know, autographs. And it was just an incredibly, incredibly special time to be able to be right there. And you know, I didn't know what I was doing with filming. Like, I had never had a video camera, but because of he gave me the credibility, people assumed you know what you're doing if you're filming him. And then you had like his mom and dad, like Phil and Danielle, trusting me to go out and hang out with their kid, because there was a lot of people trying to get involved in his world, right? And so that was there's a lot of kind of protecting him from outside influences. 21
to 25-ish, is that the time span, more or less?
Yeah.
I mean, again, peak of his powers. Let me ask you this. He was a huge personality.
Yeah.
I mean, and he was a ferocious competitor and one of the most incredible surfers to watch. I could watch it all day long still today. Mm-hmm. Unbelievable. He was also, again, a big personality, and he had a reputation of partying really hard. You're 10 years older.
No, just kidding. Yeah,
you're 10 years older, and you're sober at that time. Yeah. How did that work for you? Was that?
Well, it was tough. You know, we would be in South Africa at a house, and there'd be everything you want, and there's only like 4 or 5 of us there. And my whole thing was like, look, if my son needs me, I'm going to be there for him, because I'm always sober. I'm never going to be hammered. You're never going to catch me too drunk or too loaded to be able to be there if he breaks his leg or something. But in South Africa, you're like, man, I'm 2 days away on a plane. If I get lucky, like, I could sober up by then. Like, if I get loaded tonight, what's the problem? Like I can sober up, get it together. If he called and said, hey, I got a broken leg or I got beat up or something.
You're talking about Cole.
My son, here. But yeah, like I could get, it takes me so much time to get home. So you can rationalize, and there's everything accessible to you. You're with rock stars. You got money. Anything you want. And it's all there already. And so it was definitely not easy to stay sober through some of those times. I was definitely, I was grateful for the sobriety I had. Obviously, the foundation of that was not enough to shake me, but it wasn't easy for sure.
Listen, for someone with a addictive personality, as you said, and 10 years of partying hard, to then be in the environment where most people would go, sign me up. I'm with rock stars. They're really celebrity status. We've got everything at our disposal. You name it, it's right in front of us. Mm-hmm. And to be able to go, nope.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I mean, it was, once again though, like I wasn't one of them. Like I wasn't raised, like those guys were tight, like Bruce and Andy and those kids, like they were, and we became close, right? We would spend a lot of time on the plane, but once again, I'm not going to claim that I was like Andy's best friend since childhood, right? Like, so those guys, that would be really hard for me. I was the filmer. Like I was staff. Like I'm Joel. We love you. You're from Hanalei, but you're definitely the older guy in this group, right? You're 10 years older than us. Stay in your place over there. And it's like, cool. I'm happy being here. I'll get my shot, and then I have my own room.
So that was the dynamic.
Kind of, yeah.
Separation of
for
sorts.
For sure. And so, and I think that was something that people want to blur those lines, right? That we're all just one big crew. It's like, well, no, those guys are the crew. I was grateful to be there. I got some of those amazing experiences. I got to surf every spot I ever dreamed of as a kid, with you and Aki and Parco. Like that's, I remember being at Jeffreys Bay and them, after the contest when Kelly somehow got overscored and beat Andy in that heat. After that heat, everybody left and the airline striked. They wouldn't South African Airlines wouldn't let anybody leave Port Elizabeth. Well, Andy found another little carrier and got out of town, but I was stuck there for 2 more weeks. And it was just firing Jeffreys Bay for 2 weeks, and the money was so strong. And then like Donovan guys all pull up. It was like Drive-Thru showed up to surf, and I didn't know any of those guys at the time, but it was just fun to be able to see him and O'Connell and those guys just ripping J Bay for like a week, and it was super fun. Like a lot of those experiences where you're at Snapper or you're in, some on a boat trip, and then Bruce will bail. Like you're halfway through the boat trip and Bruce will just leave on a boat, like take a speedboat away from us. And then you got nothing to do because he's the guy you're shooting, but you're on the boat with,
I'm going to surf all day.
Guess I'm surf all day with Nathan and John and whoever else is on the boat. It was, there was a lot of those really cool experiences. And then,
you mentioned Donovan. Who would have known that 20 years later he's going to end up your neighbor here in Kauai, right?
Right. Yeah.
Wow. What an incredible experience. I can't fathom it.
That was a crazy run for sure.
Crazy run. And you were producing not just film that you were doing some movies as well, weren't you?
Yeah. Especially in the beginning. What happened is independent filmmakers, because of Apple and these cameras, we could produce our own films. And if you get music rights, you could put out a decent product. Look, like Hanalei did Ahead, one of the best surf movies.
Alexander.
Yeah, one of the best movies of all time. Inspired me and so much of us to see what it's like to create, taking footage and putting it to music and creating. And I'm sure Taylor Steele guys did it earlier, but he was just a real pioneer for us out there. For me to see someone do it in our community, and then to be like, wow, is that an opportunity for me to try that? So I did it, and there was filmmakers coming up in Australia and all these little towns. If you had a friend that was becoming a great surfer, whether it was Shane, or any of these kids that were coming up at the time, you could become a filmmaker. I think what happened was then the corporate giants like Billabong and Volcom, they would put a budget together for like a couple $100,000 to make a film about just their guys, right? So there wasn't this, my film had Kelly and Sonny, because it'd be like Bruce and Sonny and Andy were all pretty tight, so we'd all be in Australia together, so you'd get footage of everybody and you make a film about it. But then the corporation said, no, we don't want,
brand only,
we just want Billabong, right? We just want Parco, Taj, and Andy, and we're gonna do trilogy. Or it's gonna be DC Shoes gonna have, whoever, Dane, Bruce, and those guys. And so we go make that film. And then you give it all to them, and then they'd give the film away.
But you were filming for a lot of those corporate ones as well.
Yeah, that was my job. But which was great because then you didn't have the responsibility of putting a product out, but it also eliminated your ability to be creative, right? There was no reason for me to be creative because they were going to make the film. It was, it kind of squished the independent filmmaker, right?
So you were charged with get the best footage, we'll turn it into a movie.
Before you're charged with making a film,
Yeah.
and you live it, you're in Australia, and you're like, gosh, if they don't want to surf, like,
what am I going to do?
I just spent a bunch of money. I'm over here in Australia. Come on, like, get this. But then, you know, a couple years later, they're like, no. We're just going to take all this footage. We're going to pay you peanuts, and we're going to take the footage, and we're going to make a film, and we're going to give it away with a pair of trunks as a marketing thing for our trunks, right? And you're like, oh. So it kind of was, I mean, I'm speaking down on that industry because it was a little bit of a painful moment when we left our opportunity to be creative filmmakers, and then we're just kind of like hired hands. But we're also flying, you know, great planes and stayed in beautiful hotels and everything. The budgets all went up, and we all got to live an amazing experience. And some people probably hung on to making those independent films. Snap, those guys that are making that Snap series, Logan.
The last one, Snap 5 right now.
Yeah, those guys, he's going hard. But I think he was fortunate enough to be able to live a pretty good life anyway. Like, I mean, rough life, but still, yeah.
Well, it's really fun because I've been a surf turkey my whole life. I've watched every one of these films. Mm-hmm. Like, so for you to have been there doing that, like for us that watched the films, that's the only exposure we had to this. This is more so before social media where you're getting clips all day, every day. At the time, we waited for those movies to come out. Right. Oh, that's what, like, that was a froth thing, big time. Yeah. So rad. I mean, what an incredible experience. And then it wasn't just the young gun surf crew. You also have another friend, a guy named Laird.
Yeah. So just one last story on the young. Sure. I remember because what you said was really interesting, saying that you would, you know, wait for these films to come out, then you'd watch them. I remember I got to go on a trip. We went down to Pasquale's with Andy, and Dane Reynolds had just got signed with Blair was their manager. Blair Marlin had signed because I think from DC, like it was, but like you're in a car down there with Bruce, Andy, and Dane Reynolds, and like, you know, Corey Lopez. And
if you don't like, surf, these are the best of the best of the best, like in the world.
Funky, you know, Winnebago, like cruising down this bumpy Mexican road, and it felt like you're living in a surf movie. You're like, oh my, I can't believe I'm sitting there right next to him. You're like, I guess I'm supposed to video this, and then like, you know, the dogs running down the street and just trying to get all those shots. But it was crazy. It was a lot of those moments. You're like, what am I doing here? Like, I've never done this before. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just supposed to. And I think being sober was a lot of that, right? Those teams wanted someone sober to be able to be
and a little bit older. That's super. Yeah. What a cool opportunity to put yourself in. Excuse me. I mean, listen, I'm very fortunate. I've had a number of pretty recent, just kind of imposter syndrome moments, and I can only imagine that. You're like looking at the guys to your right and your left in a car. There's 4 of you, and 3 of them are best in the world surfers, and you know.
Sonny became a close friend, just being able to hang out with him, and Andy and Lindy had their trip going, and Bruce and Mia or whatever, and so then you're with him because his wife wasn't with him, and then you're like, okay, I guess we're buddies. We're gonna go eat dinner tonight, and then you're like the next day, and you're not filming most of the time. You're just kind of hanging out, and then he becomes one of your good friends, and and Poncho, like those guys were just really cool people. So then I came home, and then unfortunately, you know, we lost Andy. Huge impact to our whole community, to the whole surf world. And then Laird's family, Laird's mom and my mom were really close when I was a little kid out in Hyena. Like, I think they were part of that North Shore of Oahu migration to Kauai back in the 60s and 70s. So they were tight, 2 haole ladies with kids out there that meant, you know, their husbands maybe weren't around as much. So they were pretty close. So, you know, Lion, Laird's little brother, was like one of my best friends growing up, just an amazing human. And then Laird was a little older, but clearly you knew him. You know, he was around the house and stuff. And so once I became, you know, when I was a man, and then I was still filming, and it's like, okay, am I going to start doing, you know, real estate videos, or is there an opportunity to keep this, you know? And so I reached out to Laird and said, God, you know, I'm making films. You need some content? He's like, yeah, sure, whatever, come over. So we started hanging out more as an adult, and then that relationship grew pretty strong, where he's just been an amazing human to me, to my family, to anybody around him. I mean, you know, he gets a lot of flack, but, you know, he wants you to be better. Like, he's bummed if you're not taking care of yourself. Like, genuinely, it hurts him to see his friends not taking care of themselves. And it's hard to have friends like that. Most friends like, oh, you're an idiot. You don't want to, you know, eat good. Like, that's your own trip. Like, you're not surfing every morning? Like, why not? Like, you should be surfing every morning. Like, he's very committed to his community to make sure that everybody around him is living to their highest potential. And I just think that's it's I don't think it's, for some reason, it's not shared much, right? He gets this persona being like, oh, I'm Lance Burkhardt or whatever his thing is, you know, but like genuinely one of the most like generous to his crew and to his friends and to his community than anybody you'll meet.
Rad. Well, special. Not only is world-class waterman and innovator in the water stand-up paddling arguably existed back with the Beach Boys on Waikiki, but it didn't exist until he started it.
Right.
And then it blew up. Yeah. And foiling blew up. And towing with the tow crew, like strap crew, like incredible. There's nothing like him from a waterman perspective. Everybody else is like, people would look at people like Kai Lenny and go, Kai, he is arguably the best waterman in the world today. But all the sports he's mastered were ones that Laird and his buddies mastered and created back in the day. Just incredible what he's done. But also from a community perspective, and now we're getting into community. Laird, who lives in Hanalei, he rescues people during the floods, which now we're getting into some of the impacts that have this areas. And he rescued my friends from their roof on the other side of the river in his tinny boat. Yeah. You know, like his house was the access point for all the back and forth. So he's not just his own personal community kind of guide and cares for, but the whole freaking community.
Yeah. I mean, he's not to,
I don't know him, but this is just from the outside.
He's like a superhero, right? And I don't, like I said, he also drives me crazy. I mean, I'm not saying he's, we're all humans, right? But get that guy in a disaster. And there's like, if you're on an island and you're stuck there and you're like, who do I want to have with me that we're going to live? There's nobody better. Like, it's maybe like a female friend, but like, if you're going to have a guy that has to be with you, that's the guy you want. Like, he's going to be able to, build a house with palm trees, and he's just an innovator, and he's constantly thinking, and everything's super organized. Like, everything is super tight. Like, there's no messes. Like, that guy sweeps more than anybody I know. He's sweeping out that barn every single day, like all day long. Like, he keeps his shit tight. And so that's the kind of friend you want. Yeah. And then, like you said, the surrounding community, when the flood hit, there was but like the response to the flood we had in 2018 would have been a completely different animal without Laird. Like, it was a function. We were able to function and to respond accordingly, and to supply distribution and evacuation. Like, Laird's access to his property and his willingness to open up his world and then be a supportive part of it was huge. And, Laird was a superhero. There was probably 10 or 12 people that were super involved in building community around that disaster. So he was on a list for sure.
Rad. Well, so that brings us to today. Yeah. And community. And as I said at the beginning, one of my friends early on said, Mark, this is the razor's edge of first world and third world, as I said. The number of things that have impacted this community on the long scale, or on the decades, there's been the impact of tourism and all the things we've talked about. Yeah. But there's been also these super acute things that have happened. You mentioned the flood, and then landslides. Yeah. And there's been hurricanes. Yeah. Like, this place is one, like where my place has been wiped out 3 times by tsunamis over the last 100 years.
Where your house is,
wiped out.
Yeah, completely.
You're on an island. So again, healthcare is not like Southern California or the mainland in general. Like, it's a different animal. And to live here, although it's, again, some of the wealthiest people in the world call this place a second home or a third home. But if you live here and there's a hurricane coming, there's nowhere to hide. Right. And there's a lot of challenges that come in. I think with great beauty comes great struggle, potentially.
For sure. Bright light, dark shadow.
And right? And with all, at the same time, when you have the most beautiful place, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, you are going to, both on the land and the sea, you're going to have population. Like you said, 30% of the homes weren't there when you were growing up. And while development has been controlled, tourism probably hasn't been to the same degree. A lot of things have changed over the last, 8-10 years. But why don't you talk about, you had said when you were filming and you would come back, you would get more and more involved in the community. Talk about your history, maybe what what that looked like maybe after filming, and maybe what got you into it on a more like what roles you started to play, what your interests were, why or what or how, like what did you start doing that really got you more immersed in the really in the community, activist or actionist, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And then we'll lead that to where we are today.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's any one big moment. There's a few things, like you said, when the hurricane hit, you're looking at building community. And when these disasters happen, you know, people's personalities are heightened, right? If you're a generous person, you get real generous. If you're a greedy person, you get real greedy, right? If you're a giving person, and so if you're a helpful person, it seems like a lot of us, some of our natures were to be helpful. So when those situations come, you pull together and you all try to just make the best of whatever the situation is, whether it's a hurricane or landslides or the big flood. So yeah, and in that, I don't know, maybe it's just kind of that giving back. I always felt like I was so lucky to grow up in Hyena, just so fortunate. Like that's such a unique, you know, kind of a hit the jackpot on your childhood that it was my responsibility to give back. So, you know, at the time, I think I was on the Hanalei to Hyena Community Association board, and then I became the president. So I was working on problem solving within the community. That organization's amazing. They're very preservation based, right? They're not out doing a lot of things. They're really making sure that the reason why we love Hanalei is because of their work, right? Keeping development back, trying to make sure that whether it's signed ordinances are followed or other things that are really, you know, you don't notice it, but somebody's got to have those fights, right? And that organization was really good at that. And I ended up leading it, and it just wasn't a place I was really comfortable in. I didn't love always being in the battle, right? I'd rather find solutions for challenges and look to how can we build these public-private partnerships, right? And so at the time, the place I grew up, Hyena, was just getting out of control. And, you know, not like...
In what way? Sorry.
The visitor impacts, right? It was this amazing Nepali coast that was kind of the on everybody's bucket list, and it was completely unmanaged. So you see thousands and thousands of people coming out there to visit this tiny little parking lot to go on this trail. And so the impact to the surrounding community was overwhelming. So, you know, you have this community that's overrun with visitors that's super frustrated. And this is through like the 90s and 2000s, right, when I was kind of getting out of that filming. And then you have, on the other side of it, you have these visitors that save their life savings to go on a vacation. Like, they're not all super wealthy people. They finally get to Hanalei or get to Hyena and they get yelled at by the locals, or there's nowhere to park. So both sides were not functioning. You know, there was no harmony between those two demographics. Now, I was on the community side, right? So we're trying to figure out how do we turn this to a place that at least we can function? Because when you have this kind of impact, you know, let's talk about like my mom, who's, you know, as she gets older and there's a whole large community there that will forego their health care because of the traffic impacts or some, you know, just to get in and out of Hanalei if there's floods. So you see them going, okay, we're just not going to go to the dentist because it's just too much of a hassle because there's everybody on the road. So then that doesn't do good for them, right? So, but my mom's pretty stubborn. She's not going to leave Hyena, so she'll just hunker down and just say, look, this is what I'm going to do. But during that time, the Hyena State Park, that whole area was just becoming impacted by over-tourism. It still is, right? We're very fortunate with what we've done at the Hyena State Park, and I think that's kind of our flagship project as the executive director of the Hanalei Initiative. It's with a group of other nonprofits. It's a beautiful project, and I'm so grateful for allowing us an opportunity to talk about it. But the work's not done. Like, there's places all over the state, there's places all over the North Shore that are still impacted by over-tourism, and so, you know, we hope that this can be a model that other places can replicate, whether you're in Lanikai or, you know, places on the Big Island or in Hana. We've been in Hana a lot lately, working with our communities there to try to share in some of the lessons we've learned to try and provide these models. And I think, you know, what we saw in Hyena was agencies working together with community, right? I think the success in these operations are when community can lead these efforts and letting the support come from government. Rather than waiting for government to solve these challenges, it seems like that just rarely happens. And when it does, it's done probably more inefficient than we want. So we can either complain about that for 20 years, or we can step in there and try to solve those problems from the community's perspective. And we've been fortunate to see some success in that.
Yeah, well, amazing. And yeah, so talk a bit about some of the successes you've had here on the North Shore. Maybe talk about, because you've talked about the impacts of traffic, and now that's been changed. Mm-hmm. So talk about what happened, maybe what the catalyst was, and how you solved that problem and what that looks like today.
Yeah, so prior to the 2018 flood, like I said, we were trying to look at creating a master plan in that area because we knew the impacts were overwhelming. There was over 3,500 people a day that were visiting the area. It's a 2-lane road. There was cars parked all over the road. You couldn't get first responders out to this place. So you had this huge impact to the community. So the community started planning, and everybody at the table was, the Department of Transportation, the county, the state, our community leaders. And we all came together and said, look, we'd meet every other Saturday and try to figure out what is the appropriate number of people that we can have? What's the capacity that this place can handle? How do we get them in and out of this place? And so we had kind of came up with this dream with a planner. We had a planning firm, PBR, helped us kind of facilitate this process. And it was like, let's go from 3,500, how about 900 people? And you make sure that the visit industry is at the table. Sue Kanoho is there to say, yeah, that sounds like we can do that. Okay, what if we get, so we have 900 people. Let's see if we can get half of them in a shuttle. Should we do that? Okay, we'll talk about that. And we put it in the plan. And then you kind of put this plan on the shelf and you're like, how are you ever going to implement that? Like, those plans are great, but they're not that valuable if they're sitting on a shelf. But unfortunately, it's hard to make that shift, right? Because there's a lot of money involved in that. There's a lot of people selling cheeseburgers with those 3,500 people that are going to put pressure on trying to reduce that number, right? There's lives have been built, colleges are being paid for by this revenue, so it's really a tough one. And then all of a sudden we get this flood in 2018, which just shuts the place down for a year.
Yeah, talk a little bit about the flood and the impact and why that was a catalytic moment that allowed you to plan, because people couldn't get there for a period of time. Talk about what happened. It was unbelievable.
Well, the timing was amazing because we had done the planning, right? We already had the plan. It had taken us 10, the master plan was done. It had been 10 years of done. Well, it wasn't done for 10 years. It had been done over a 10-year period it took us to do it. Then it was done for about, a year. And then the flood hit. The implementation, I think, is what happened during that time. So in 2018, April is like 7 years ago, 2 days ago, April 15th, we had more rainfall in 24-hour period than anywhere in the nation. It was like 58 inches in our area. And there was, 20 landslides up and down the road. And it completely cut off and isolated that 8-mile area for about a year, right? So during that time.
Yeah, a year.
So
off limits.
Well, and what they did was the county said, okay, we're going to eliminate all non-resident access, right? And we're gonna shut this place down for a year, and because they have to clean up this road and do these soil nails and do this whole slope stabilization along this whole 5-mile stretch, we're gonna have to work all day. We got to work from 8 to 4.
For context, if you haven't been to the North Shore, if you haven't been to the Hanalei, to the end of the road, KA Beach area, it's a 2-lane road with 1-lane bridges, like 8 or 9 1-lane bridges. So, and I don't know, 3 of those bridges were wiped out as a result of this or something.
Yeah, there was just these landslides that were all over. So what they did is they said, look, you can't go out there unless you're a resident. We'll allow residents in and out, and we're going to have these convoys once a day. So from noon to 1, we'll open the road up and let everybody in and let everybody out. And so during that time, we had to get supplies out there. We had to be able to, people were building homes out there. You're trying to restore normalcy to people, and then people have to go to work. So creating ocean access with boats and ferry systems, and we, as a community, were able to step in and work towards finding these solutions, whether it came to evacuation and then supply distribution. And like I said earlier, people like Laird, Mehana Vaughn, who's just an incredible leader in our community, Coral McCarthy. I mean, there's so many, Hoku Kabibi. These people just rose to the top and started doing amazing things. But Mehana started guiding us as a community to plan, how do we want to look after this flood ends? And she kept kind of talking to me, saying, like, what are you going to do after this? You seem to enjoy this space of community building and finding solutions. And at the time, we needed government help. So they said, okay, Joel, why don't you talk to governments? You seem to do well with those guys. So I kind of became this liaison between agency and community. And Mehana's like, you seem to do well in that role. Maybe there's a place for you there after this. And then some people that had moved to Hanalei said, they had some money. They said, look, we'll help. You seem to do well. You helped us out. We'll put a couple $100,000 in a bank account, and you can just make that your pay for the next. If you can put together a nonprofit, you could do this for a living moving forward. And I was like, man, I was kind of over filming the stuff I was filming. I love building strong community systems, and there was a state park that they were trying to implement. And so there was an opportunity there for me to switch directions. But back to the park. So they shut down the road for a year. At that time, State Park says, look, we're going to try to implement this master plan. We're going to try to rebuild the parking lot. We're going to try to put in a reservation system for the parking management. And if you guys can get a shuttle together, go for it, community. And the county said, look, we got 1.5 million seed money. We'll put it out there to anybody out there that wants to be able to start a shuttle. And everybody's like, not it. No, nobody really wanted it. And I was like, God, maybe we should try it. Like, should we try this? Like, I've never done a shuttle system. And so I brought in Mina Marita, I'd worked for at the legislature, who was just a mentor of mine, and said, Mina, what do you think? Could we do this? And she's like, yeah, if you put together a board of smart, business-minded people and not try to just build like a community association around angry natives. Like, if you want to have a group that can help facilitate this project, I'll help. So we put together an organization. I think, Nanea Marston, who at the time during this flood, the Hanalei soccer field was growing. This is a little bit of a side story, but I'll just take it. Good. It was like 3 feet high. And she's like, look, can you help us mow that soccer field over there, Joel? You seem to be connected with some people. Can you help us get this soccer field mowed? And I'm like, yeah, maybe we could. So I talked to a buddy of mine who had some resources, had some dough, and said, look, can you help us? So he gave me $1,000. I hired a bunch of the boys, and we went out and we mowed the soccer field. And I said, Nanea, we'll do that if you join the board. Like, you got to give me a board seat. She's like, because she's a legend in our community. Her dad's owned the Nui forever. So she's like, okay, I'll do it. So she came on the board. We got this one with the county at the time. It was the Carvalho administration. And then the Kawakami administration had said, yeah, we'll allocate this 1.5 for a shuttle system out there if you guys want to manage it as a nonprofit. So we put it together and allowed us to launch this model. And we had this kind of war chest of money. It was a pretty good chunk of dough. And we opened the road after a year being closed with the reservation system in place at the park. And we launched the shuttle, and the state had a for-profit running the parking lot. So there was kind of this conflict because they were trying to sell more parking spots and we were trying to sell more. We wanted less cars, right? The whole point of the shuttle was to reduce the cars in our community. And this for-profit was trying to sell more car parking. And there was a 100-car parking lot. So there's some problems with this separate system, right? And then you had the Hyena State Park, you had the Hui that was trying to do their kalo farming down there, and it was just kind of all fractured, but it was a great start, right? It gave us some time to kind of get it, to see where the problems were. Then COVID hit, it shut it all down, and we were saying, look, we're burning through all this money to run this shuttle inefficiently because we're competing against this parking lot. We need to restrict the parking so we can stabilize the shuttle. It was problematic that we weren't able to be successful, and we had some really smart people on our side kind of giving us this guidance. State parks was like, sorry, those are our people. They do Diamond Head, they do all our state parks, right? We're not going to just get them out of here because you guys want to have your shuttle system successful. We're like, yeah, but that's the whole point. Like, and then we got the Hui involved. Well, they were always involved, right? They built the plan, it's their area, and we said, look, like, if you guys want to integrate this system, either give them the shuttle or give us the parking. And when the Hui got involved with Kirsten and Chipper guys, and they said, look, we can build this collaboration between state and community, and through their leadership, through Chipper Wickman's leadership, we're able to, and then with state parks agreeing to, we integrated the system between the two after COVID, right? So hopefully I'm not jumping around too much. No. There's making some sense of this, but after COVID, we relaunched again, and we took over. The Hanalei Initiative took over management of the reservation system, the research, the funding distribution, all of the access, whether it's the gate attendants, the shuttles, and all of it. And then since then, it's been amazing.
What's been the net impact for the community?
So how much more time we got? No, just kidding.
We're cruising. We're good. This is why we're here. This is the good stuff.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the shuttle and the whole management system is prior to that 2018 flood, there was 3,500 people a day hitting that park, right? Now there's 600 and 500 are in shuttles. 100,
is that the breakdown?
Yeah, every day. Wow. It's relentless. So and what happened is we initially wanted to go from Princeville, right? It was like, let's shuttle them from Princeville, have everybody get out of their car. We'll just have this. But there's a whole community of merchants in Hanalei that would have been affected by that, right? And kind of short-sightedness, like, let's just do this. And then they start going, no, don't shuttle people by here without figuring that out, right? And so we're like, oh no, what are we gonna do? Well, then Waipa, Stacy Sproat, who is a friend I've known for years, was like, hey, would you allow us to park some cars here while we shuttle them? Because then they could drive through Hanalei town, they could park there and still be 7 miles from the end of the road. So you still had a lot of reduction of rent-a-cars out there, but you're able to support the merchants, right? It was this great kind of meeting in the middle. And Stacy said, yeah, go for it. We're like, we don't got no money. She's like, yeah, that's fine, we'll figure that out. So we did the first year just kind of on a handshake, and then the revenue started coming in. So now we're able to write them a decent check every month. And then the Hui out in Hyena, who takes care of all that land, who's been doing that for generations for
they've
nothing.
done an amazing job out there.
And they've been doing it for free, right? They've been buying their own gas, weed whapping, growing kalo as just on a curator relationship with the state, right? They just taking over and say, hey, we'll just manage this area, just no money either way. Now they get a revenue every month, and they get to split some of the shuttle proceeds. So now you go down there now, and they have new tractors. There's a little farmhouses. There's a full staff now that's all paid from this designated revenue. They have summer programs. So there's kids out there every summer now that are learning through this. And all that revenue is what comes through the shuttle system and the management of the state park. So while we get to be the ones that like do the podcast about it, it's really the work of all those guys for generations to take care of this area and to demand that we reduce the impacts of the visitors and to put together a system that they would be acceptable with. And then the partner with Waipaw Foundation allowing us to have a satellite parking spot. It doesn't work without those nonprofit partners, right? And so the revenue that comes in, it only makes sense that we then share it with those groups. And then, you know, there's a lot of other community benefits we can go into or not with some of the revenue that we get to do as well.
Well, it's super neat. And the fact that it's now, 4 years-ish into post-COVID, it's working. If you go down there, you see it. But from my first time, because I just started coming to this island on a regular basis right before the flood. So I've driven out there early on, and it was just cars. And now it's just beautiful and meandering, and you get to really appreciate it. And I can only imagine from people that have lived here that what a humongous change has happened for them.
For sure. I was talking to my friend Jason Irons. I don't know if you know him. One of the greatest guys out there. And he was sharing how his older son, who's 22, he wouldn't let him ride his bike on the road back then when he was 8, because that was back in that area, that pre-2018 flood when it was just a mess. He goes, and now his kid's 9, he rides the Coal Pond all the time now. You know, there's some big shuttles out there that we're trying to reduce the size of shuttles. It's not without impact, the current system, but it's a whole different world for those kids out there now. Like I said, I say that there's still times when there's way too many visitors. There's a beach park right down the street, the county park, that just gets cracks because you've restricted this area. You're going to see impacts all the way to your house, right, of places. So it's not like it's just this silver bullet, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And it's got revenue that's being reinvested in the community. It's not managed by Disney or some corporate giant. It's really a community-based circular economy where we're able to reinvest overwhelming majority of the money back into the community, which is, I mean, that's all you could ever hope for.
Rad. Well, you also there's other things that you guys have accomplished. That's a huge one.
Yep.
But you guys are doing parks and basketball courts and all these cool things for the local community.
Yeah.
And then you've got some big things on the horizon. Can you talk about, you have a new facility, you have some big goals there. Can you talk about some of what's next?
Sure. So I'll try to wrap up the shuttle system. We are now expanding to Princeville. What we did is we have a transfer point in Hanalei. So I don't want to get in the weeds on it, but basically, because there's a lot of people staying in Princeville, we'll pick them up at their resort, up at the Mackay Club, take them out to the park. And so we just started this last summer, where then coming back to Princeville, you have to get off the shuttle in Hanalei and get on another shuttle and go up the hill. And then we survey the daylights out everybody, and about 70 to 80% are shopping. So we know that there's people spending money in there. If you get them out of the vehicle, because if they're in their car and they leave the park, they could drive right to Poipu. But if you get them out of their car and force them to stand around and smell fresh burgers after they've been hiking for 6 hours and the internet comes up, they can do some Instagramming. You'll see people spend money there. So all of a sudden we're able to kind of prove out our case that is the logical place to diversify the parking. So we have parking in Waipaw and in Princeville. So that's kind of our next step. So for the next 5 years, we're electrifying our fleet. We have 7 brand new electric vans instead of the big gas funky ones. So we're reducing the size of the vehicles on the road, which it adds more vehicles, but they're still so much smaller, so much more, it's like they're 12 passengers instead of 24s. So 2 12s now, and they're electric. We're able to charge them in Waipaw, and we're able to install photovoltaic to charge the vehicles locally, and they never have to go up and fill up gas. So it's been really special to see the transition into electrifying and then to push some of that traffic up to Princeville. And then right now we're signing a 10-year contract with the Hui and the state so that we can secure this for 10 years. And so there's a positive revenue source there for 10 years, so you can kind of plan what you're going to do with that. And that'll get into that next project, which is we're fortunate enough to last summer take over the old LDS church building in Hanalei. The Mormon church went up for sale, And as another one of the problems is, you have this huge visitor impact, and then you have this kind of residential change of our community where it can be a second or third home where it just sits empty. Like, it's one thing to say, okay, a vacation rental is going to put some dough into the community. There's houses now that just, because you can't open a vacation rental, if it wasn't a vacation rental, you can just buy it and leave it empty and then just live on the mainland and come a couple times a year, right? And then there's less residents living there. So our town that used to, when I was a kid, I had all my buddies lived in Hanalei. I always wanted to live in Hanalei because all the cool kids lived in Hanalei and lived out in Hyena. But now there's only some very fortunate kids that live in Hanalei.
Joel,
right?
This is happening everywhere. Like, this is a whole nother podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
Because if you're in vacation communities or high demographic or desirable resort towns, this is happening on any waterfront area that it's allowed. So it's happening here. It's happening all over Southern California. If you go to Mission Beach in San Diego, you go to Balboa Island or the Peninsula in Newport or Huntington, it's home after home after home is now a vacation rental or it's a second home, and they sit dark so much of the time. So one thing, going back to the shuttle, the thing if you're coming to Kauai, remember, it's like a national park. You need to put in early to get your reservation if you're going to park there. And even if you're going to take the shuttle, you need to reserve in advance, and it books up far in advance.
It's sold out every day.
Yeah. So I blew it on this trip.
We'll get you a pass.
That's fine. Thank you. But it is. So plan accordingly for that. And then one of the things that we could we could go down all kinds of paths. One of the biggest challenges that I think most people, maybe in the business world, but even tourists experience when they come to Kauai, maybe more than any of the other islands, is the lack of assurance that a restaurant or a place will be open when you go there for lunch or for dinner. And the reason for that is we have a shortage of workers. And the reason for that goes back to the housing.
Yeah.
So there's so many, like, I love the fact that you are attacking certain things, but there's so many, to your point.
Yeah.
Like, the housing affordability, property taxes in Hawaii make that more challenging as well. But that's probably the biggest challenge. I always tell people, if you're really skilled at something and you want to be really busy, go to Kauai, because you can crush it because there's so much demand, but you got to be able to afford to stay.
Well, and you'll be able to afford to stay because you're going to crush on the prices, but you need a place to live.
I mean, that was my point. Yeah, a place to live.
Right.
Yes.
So if you can find a rental or something so if you grew up there, you're like 6 of you living in a house in Kilauea, you guys are crushing it because your income went so high. If you're an electrician or a craftsman or something and will deliver, a plumber, like any of those trades are just crushing it if you have your housing locked up. The problem is the housing is becoming less and less. And like you said, it's shared at other communities all over you're talking about beachfront towns, ski towns suffer that same thing, right? There's no workforce housing that's able to, let alone the service industry, even the trade industry. So in Hanalei,
you're trying to solve that or help solve that.
We're definitely trying to tip the scales a little bit, right? So we got this beautiful piece of property. It's a unicorn. It came up for sale. We're like, man, that's a bummer. That old church is going to it's residential, so it's going to turn into another second home that no one's going to live in, and we're just going to see a place that used to bring a lot of people together every Sunday and build this whole community around them. Whether you're in, that some of our greatest people come from that demographic, right? There's this huge, so when we lose that, one of those places is all of a sudden gone forever. And then Hanalei just turns more and more into visitors and then second homes or people that don't have to work, and there are a lot of amazing people in that demographic. But it would be nice to have people that work and live there, right? So we were like, man, let's see if we can kind of get our hands on that place and kind of put an ask out to see if anybody would help. And it was we only had 30 days. It went on the market and they were going to sell it. They were taking all offers at the end of June. And then an amazing friend of the initiative who had helped us with one of our other projects, I think it was the Hanalei Pavilion project, said, yeah, I'll buy it and I'll let you guys have it for 3 years. And you guys can fundraise for 3 years. And if you can pay me back, you can have an option to buy it at today's price, which was in 2024. You have till 2027. And just whatever you want to do with it, just figure it out. And we're like, we're not sure what we're going to do with it. Maybe it's like, it's an old, beautiful building. We could do some community benefits, whether it's jujitsu or, whatever, right? Basketball, even like you could do kids programs there. But it was residential, so we were kind of struggling in the first couple months of what to do with the property. But we just knew we wanted to we knew what we didn't want it to do, right? We didn't want it to go down this world of second homes. And
not to mention the space that you're in right now is ironically upstairs from the restaurant you used to run. I didn't realize that piece.
Yeah.
What a great community resource, but it's small. So now you have
it's
this
expensive. It's $8,000, $7,000 a month that we don't see any of it, right? It's helping another private landlord do that. So we moved out of that. We got into the building. We renovated, and able to put our offices out of that building. The planning director was kind enough to say, there's enough similarities to what's happening previously that we can grandfather our use in there as a nonprofit, solving kind of our challenges in the town. And so then all of a sudden we started looking at the housing issue and saying like, wow, how many houses could we put in here? How many units could we do in here? And so we, there was, it's all based off of wastewater. There's no sewer there. So without getting the weeds on it, you could put 3 5-bedroom septics on the property, right? There's one
3 5-bedroom.
So one 5-bedroom septic. A septic system can handle 5-bedroom house. Or 5 bedrooms is kind of the allocation of these biggest septic systems that are built around our town. So this, because it's 34,000 square feet, you can do 3 of them. One of them already feeds the church. So you could do 2 more. So if you could do 2 5-bedrooms, how many bedrooms total is that?
10 bedrooms.
10 bedrooms. So if you got 10 bedrooms, could you do
You were
10?
testing me there, I could tell.
I was just trying to make sure, like, so could you do 10 apartments, right? Could you do 10 little apartments? Well, no, because of density, whatever, and then there was this other law that was you can't put 2 buildings, anything more than 2 buildings into one septic. So you couldn't do 5 1-bedroom units into one septic system because of the Department of Health. So we advocated with our partner, a friend of ours, Luke Evslin, who's the housing committee chair, paddler.
Big paddler.
Yep, huge friend of ours. And we came up with the legislation this session to eliminate that requirement, right? To deregulate that so that you can put multiple buildings into one. And it's at conference committee this week.
Oh, wow.
It's
right,
gone. We've been chasing it down. Yeah. HB 735
wow.
Is going to be a law that's going to help all of these communities that have septic systems that don't have sewers, right? So if you had a 2-bedroom house and a 2-bedroom house and you had enough room to put another guest unit for your mom or something, you couldn't, even though there's only 5 bedrooms into the bedroom because it's a 3rd unit, right?
So
you'd have to add a whole nother septic system.
Understood.
And if you don't have land on the property, you can't do it. So this allows you to feed, as long as you don't exceed the capacity of the septic system. So we got that legislation changed.
It's almost like the ADU ruling in California, where they're allowing you to put ADUs on to try to get additional dwelling units,
yes.
to try to provide additional rooms,
increase
for
inventory, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so that was legislation that was we didn't have the opportunity to do what we want to do there. So now we will be able to add 10 apartments. And then if we reduce our footprint on the church, our master plan shows 13 units, and we're all in on lifeguards and teachers. We really want those first essential workers in our community. Housing's a crisis, as it is everywhere. You need busboy housing. We need farm housing. Sure, the list goes on. You need small family housing. This is not that. This is literally super small units. They're absolutely beautiful, and they're targeted for our first responders, like lifeguards and teachers. We have 27 lifeguards that work in that area. There's only 5 that live on that side of the bridge. The other 22 are driving from out of town, right? So that's a complete, and the 5 that live out there live in like downstairs remodeled kitchens that are like, just funky little places out there, and they're loving it. They're grateful for that because there's nowhere to live. So if we can build 13 beautiful 1-bedroom apartments in downtown Hanalei, it's as amazing as anything I've ever been a part of. And we're cranking on it. We've been able to.
Rad.
It's crazy.
And let me just give kudos, because recognizing the importance and the value to not just every community, but to this community, those 2 roles of lifeguards and teachers. And I'll just personally say the lifeguards on Kauai are unbelievable. I'm such a huge fan. I know that Chief Kalani Vieira was in that chair not too long ago. Wasn't with me. He is incredible. And they're the most humble badasses on the planet. They're
You're
incredible.
A big supporter too.
I'm a huge supporter of them. Yeah. I love them. And I'm just grateful for what they do for the community. It's amazing. So kudos. That's really, really exciting
to be able to house them. It's like, because some of the variances we're having to get these 13 units that are not connected, to get this, it's like it's for lifeguards and teachers. Like, you don't support them. Like, yeah. So then
turn that down legislation.
Because then you can replicate that model at other communities, right? Whether they're for lifeguards or for busboys, we need them all. But you have to have these little housing models available to us. And so to try and kind of break down the door of some of these restrictions so that we can then replicate that at other places is kind of our goal here.
Yeah. It's cool to see how it's changing the community. Again, just from my experience being here and watching it happen. And fortunately I met you. And so I saw as soon as you took possession of the church, I happened to be on island, and you walked me through it before you had started doing any of the reno and all this. And you showed me the initial drawings for, like, it's really brilliant. And I just give you kudos and everybody in the community. The community is so impressive on how people are coming together. And you've talked a lot about some of the names of those folks and how you've been able to work with the public to bring them into the fold and get people. I know you've had there's a lot of really impressive people in the community. And there's also a lot of people that you love this island and have bought real estate here, whether they spend a lot of time here or not. There's a lot of wealth. I mean, I think just for context, there's like 18 billionaires on Kauai now, like, or have, we've all heard of Zuckerberg, but there's many, many, many others. I hope that they're all recognizing their opportunity to make a huge difference in their communities here.
I hope they will recognize too. I think there are some that do. Once again, we said this early on. I think a lot of that net wealth, I don't know, I'm new to this space, right? I've only doing this for like 6 years now, but it seems like those philanthropic models are set up before they get here, right? They didn't make their money here. So they already give to their college, they already give to their foundation. And so if you can get to the foundation, you could probably see revenue, but they're not coming here and then trying to like spread their money around. I think Zuckerberg has done a great job. He seems to really be interested in supporting a lot of different efforts on the island. I mean, but generally I don't see a lot of that at all. And I don't think I think there's probably risk with that, right? You throw your money out and then you're buying your way in, and there's a lot of optics there. Like, I think people would still take it. You take the risk. I think it probably makes sense to kind of just limp into that a little bit, and then because who are you going to give to? There's some nonprofits that are super funky, right? That fall apart, that are kind of seedy, and so doing your due diligence, I hope that they will give more. I think there's some amazing people that are doing amazing work here. But I also understand that it must be a tricky world I don't know what it's like to have $1 billion.
You don't?
I mean, but it seems like, I think it's our job also as a community to provide models that are safe for them to give to, right? You want to make sure that you have a strong board, strong accounting. Our financials are like tack sharp, and so are hopefully a lot of these. Like, you don't want Elon coming after us, right? We want to make sure everything is super on point, and then it'd be easy for them to give to, right? Because then, like, look, this is going to change lives. You're going to see the success. They've got a successful model here. They built the basketball court. They built the playground. We've done other things as a community. This is the entity to help support amongst others. So I think it's getting better, but it's not like it's just this waterfall of money that people assume is happening.
Yeah. Well, it takes time, but I think proof's in the pudding and proximity. Like, when people start experiencing or seeing the impacts or the change that's happening. Yeah. So to that end, what do you hope, with all the work that's being done and the visioning and all the people that are engaged in this, like, what do you hope 10 and 20 years from now, Hanalei, the 8 miles from Hanalei to K Beach, what do you hope it looks like? What do you hope it changes, or what's the magic wand for that area?
I hope that the solutions come from the community. I think we've done a great job of proving that that's the best solutions come from within community. So whatever they are, I think hopefully they're led by strong leaders in our town, and we have enough of them to say that, how. And I hope that the impacts of the visitor industry is reduced. I mean, and there's great models right there. Like, there's no reason we shouldn't be replicating that at all these beach parks around the town. Like, it's unfortunate because it does spread it out, but that's part of the deal. Like, there's too many people. Like, movie theaters sell out. Like, you can't get into Barracuda restaurant because there's only so many seats, right? It's not personal. There's only so many places, and otherwise you're just going to ruin this place that's so special to so many people. So we need to set these capacity limits at these places. And I would love to see more of those. And then systems that will allow harmony between those two demographics, right? There's a path going into Hanalei right now, which is just amazing, a walking path. There's one on Aku that we're trying to get the county to work with us on putting together. And people
hold on. There's a walking path?
Yeah, right down from Grandpa's, from Hanalei all the way to Dolphin. You should come down. There's a path going in right now. It's right by the school.
It's going in right now?
No, it's a full sidewalk all the way through town. But it's at grade. So I say sidewalk. It's not a curb sidewalk. It's at grade that we've been super involved in working with the Department of Transportation on implementing. It's a beautiful project. It's going to create more walkability in Hanalei, a place that's had none. It's super dangerous to walk in.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's an argument to say, like, well, when there wasn't so many people there, you didn't need it, right? Yeah. But unfortunately now you do. And people don't want to walk on the side of the road. When I was a kid, you had to walk in the mud puddle or you would get lickings. And nowadays, guys walk in the road with their strollers and their whole families. And I think the vacation rule says walk into Hanalei. So there's this anger that goes back and forth there because the residents. So back to my point, if you can create these systems of harmony, what do we want to see? We want to see these models where there's reciprocal respect. So if you create a path down Aku, we get some press back like, oh, you're doing that for the tourists. You're trying to help the tourists. It's like, no, we're trying to help the fisherman with this big boat trying to get down to the boat ramp. He can't drive down Aku because there's tourists all over the road. Yeah. Put them on a path and let him get to work or go fishing. Let the families that have to go down, let the yard workers with their trailers and mowers get down to Hanalei. So creating those places where you can find those public-private partnerships to build a stronger community, whether it comes to, mobility, I think that's where we're headed. And the nice thing is we have relationships with government, with agency. We've got a strong community, and I think there's a real opportunity to see some of those come through.
Rad. I mean, if I had a magic wand, some of it I think would never, I just don't think the land is set up for it, but if you could make a sidewalk from Princeville all the way down into Hanalei town that you could walk or hypothetically bike ride, it's such a gorgeous area. I think people would do it all day, every day, but I don't know how you build that on the side of a hillside. But again, I'm not pushing for it, but again, wild ass magic wand. What if we could walk all the way from Princeville into Hanalei town? Holy schmoly. Yeah. I mean, we'll take it on Aku Road down to the pavilion and down to the pier, but it's just one of those areas where more people out of cars, everybody wins, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think the risk is that more people doesn't always equate to success, right? So if it's cars and people, if you have cars, traffic going down, and then you have this path with tons of people walking through it, like you're like, whoa, like we've got to put some kind of, which is tough because there's people's, you walk through those stores in Hanalei and those are our brothers and sisters that are working those stores. So you're not wanting to hurt the merchants, right? But we have to be full at some point, right? We have to say, look, this is what we feel comfortable with. We can live with this amount of resources or this amount of income. We're good.
Yeah. It's a challenging, again, podcast number 8, like the business context because of the cost of renting in Hanalei. You're like, no, I need every single person. I need to be open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week, but I can't get staffing because I don't have housing. Yeah. But rents are going up. Yeah. So no, you need more people. Like it's a very challenging cycle that needs to be kind of navigated with all parties, right? Which is hard.
That's the challenge because you find yourself defending your burger stand or whatever you're selling, right? It's really important. So it's hard to look at it holistically, right? And that's where you have people like yourself and there are those, property owners that are looking at it holistically and even resorts, that look at it from a big picture perspective. And when you find those, I think we need to really honor them and then work with them to be able to find these successes on the North Shore.
Rad. I love it. Thank you for what you're doing. Listen, there's a lot of quotes. Again, when we get to the very end, we'll share where we can find more about you and about Hanalei Initiative and maybe all the different organizations that are doing good work. But there's just for you, there's a quote that I found that I just thought was super rad, very quick, but I can't remember who it was, but it says, Joel strives to live aloha, bringing love, respect, and deeply ethical values to all that he does. And I think that's what you do, and I think that's why you're having such success bringing people together to do the work for the community. So,
was my mom give you that?
No, it wasn't your mom.
Okay, well, that was very kind of
But again, what you're doing is being recognized.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, fortunately, there's been so much hard work on before us and before me that I'm able to benefit from everybody that just through so many challenging times on the North Shore. And for us, we don't want to get into. I mean, obviously, there's people that yelled at us for building a playground. Like it's amazing how there's always gonna be opposition to everything. But overall, we try to find projects that are overwhelmingly supportive and then go after those with those building those public-private partnerships.
Right. It's super material. So thank you. Almost to the end, I can't not bring it up. You're doing all this work for the community that you grew up in and that you love. You mentioned Cole, your older son, but you also have 3 littles.
I do.
How's it bringing them up where you grew up and being the beneficiaries of maybe being able to ride their bike in the streets and surfing pine trees and doing all the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's one of those jobs because the visitor is such a huge impact. It's like job security. Like you're never going to, I don't think we're ever going to win if whatever the measurement of success is there. Like we can continue to make improvements in little areas, hopefully, and hopefully we can all work together to have a healthy visitor entry because it's so valuable. I mean, there's just all this people coming here to spend money. Like, it's beautiful as long as we don't just let it ruin our community. But being a father in my 50s to a 9-year-old, rock star who thinks he's just the next greatest thing, and I don't know, he's great. But I mean, and then I have twin 5-year-old girls who are just as special as anybody on the planet. So being able to be engaged in their life is crazy. And then to do it in Hanalei, where I grew up in Hyena. I didn't get to grow up in Hanalei. So to grow up in Hanalei and surf pine trees and jump off the pier, like, I feel like I'm new to Hanalei. Like, that's even though I've been there 25 years now. The first 25 in Hyena and the last 25 in Hanalei. Hanalei is really special. So getting to raise those kids out there is great. I look forward to the weekends, and I'm like, I can't wait to go take my girls surfing. And then I'm like, I can't wait to go back to work because we're really gonna work on this. Right now we're doing this albizia removal program that I didn't get into.
I just saw it. Albizia removal.
Well, out in Wainiha now, we're doing all these. We're trying to take out big invasive trees. We got this grant, and it's so exciting to be able to. Who we just helped? We worked with Chris Pico, who's just lifeguard rock star, who saved more lives in Hanalei than anybody else in that lineup for the last 25 years. We were able to go into his property that he bought in Wainiha. Somehow he pulled it together and got a piece of property right on the river, and we took out, half a dozen massive albisias in his front property. Yeah, so, and that was the grant. So working with those community to help invest in his property, giving money to tree trimmers in our community, and then letting him enjoy the benefits of that, even though the community benefits, because we're removing these big invasive trees, was really special. And I don't know, to me, I guess, like, doing that now has been great. I know I got into that off my kids.
No, it's cool. No, it's super cool. I love that listen, I had an opportunity to go visit your house, and we'd grab a stand-ups out of the trees and paddle down the little creek down to the beach. And dude, it's like as Hawaii gets. It's stunning. So congratulations for you. And the kids are so cute. As towhead come.
Yeah.
It's rad. Super good for you. And then, listen, I could talk about albisias, and I could talk about, I saw the howbush was all removed on the river in Hanalei, and just all the good things that are going on. But let's leave it at this. Let me ask you one last question, and that is, for anybody coming to the island, or let's say they're coming to the North Shore, tourists or somebody thinking they want to move here, whatever, what message would you give those folks, or request, or what would you share with them before they get here?
I mean, it's an amazing place, and like you said earlier, like, I would hope that they would be able to enjoy it. I mean, obviously, you can go down these like lectures of being respectful and make sure you stay on the path. But I would encourage people to learn more about it if you have the opportunity. If you read the Waipaw Foundation's website. Like, Waipaw Foundation does amazing work in our community for children in restoring cultural native forests, and does these kids programs. Like, that's an amazing entity that people can come to Hanalei and stay in a vacation rental a block away and never know about that. They'll just never know about it, right? And maybe we don't do a good enough job advertising it, but like, if I've got the microphone for a minute and you're coming to Hanalei, learn about the Waipaw Foundation. Those guys are amazing, right? And I mean, there's some other nonprofits, but I think that would be a great thing to do, is just to learn about what's going on just below the surface. It's not just barracuda and surfing the pier. And if you just do that, that's great too, because there's great surf instructors. Barracuda is an amazing organization. They're a great restaurant. They do great, buying local food. Like, it's one of the best restaurants on the planet for so many different reasons. But if you did, it would be cool to kind of learn a little more about what's going on in Hanalei. And I think it's easy to do if you just spend a minute, like, Googling nonprofits on the North Shore of Kauai.
Hanalei Initiative, Waipaw Foundation. The history here is so rich and so beautiful, and there's so much written about this area. We didn't talk about it because it would have taken a lot of time, but I would challenge anybody, if you're going to go to Ke'e Beach, end of the road, look up Taylor Camp. Taylor Camp is this crazy story of that hippie era. It's wild what went on out there.
Elizabeth Taylor's brother.
Right. Started, so there was all kinds of implications. There's so much history that there's more to do than just to come out here and enjoy it, learn a little bit about it before you come. And I think you'll get a much richer experience when you're here.
For sure. And I think it'll be easier to see why you would want to respect it, right? Why you can kind of try to be a good visitor because it's such a good place, right? But it's easy to kind of just get lost in like, oh, it's spring break, let's just go rage out there, and it's definitely not that.
No,
like,
it is definitely not that.
Yeah, try to keep it down after 8.
Yeah, it's a community. Well, Joel, thank you for all you do. Thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing the story. What a rad, cool, interesting story, and it's really making a difference in the community. So I'm proud of you, and thank you for doing it.
Thanks for giving me an opportunity, man.
Yeah, buddy.
Really
Thanks so much.
you.
Right on.